All right. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to YPO Presents Ask the Expert. And I'm not the experts. There are two coming with us today, Noah and Michelle, and they're going to introduce themselves in a minute. I am Maëlle Gavet. I'm the CEO of Techstars. We are the largest pre-seed investor in the world, and we have well over 3,000 companies in our portfolio, which means that we get a lot of questions from our portfolio companies about best path to exit and how to strive beyond. And so I'm very excited to not be the one doing the talking today, because a lot of the questions that I'm going to ask today are the questions that I'm hearing our portfolio company ask me day in, day out. So I am joined, as I said, by two amazing business leaders, Noah and Michelle. They're going to discuss the high and low of selling a business, the path to exit, and the challenge of deciding what comes next. Welcome, Noah and Michelle.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So maybe we can just start with the basic, which is introducing yourself, because not everybody knows you. So Noah, do you mind starting and talking about what you have built and what you have done across software and staffing services and your current role and everything?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a serial entrepreneur, quote unquote. I got an early start in college, but originally started a software development business, then a health tech company, a prop tech company, an agriculture tech company. There's kind of a trend of trying to bring software to fragmented, kind of older industries. But most recently, I had a software staffing business called DevBase. We employ software engineers in 25 countries or so. We sold that business in 2021. And then also had a venture fund in parallel to that, where we were called Candor Ventures, where we were investing in pre-seed and seed stage companies fairly agnostically, and also sold a part of that fund off in that same time period. But I now run what is Austin Capital. So we're a single family office. But really, we're a holding company for fintech and financial service firms. We both invest and majorly acquire. For instance, we own a bank, we own multiple RIAs, or registered investment advisors, asset management platform, core banking technology company, virtually a bunch of companies in the fintech financial service space.
Wow. Okay. So you sleep about 2 hours a night, and you're about 150 years old, given everything that you've done. Is my calculation right?
I'm drinking a lot of water, so I look a lot younger than I am.
That's the water. Exactly. That's the water. I get it. Thank you so much, Noah. Michelle. So, Michelle, another very successful entrepreneur. Can you share a little bit about your journey and your experience?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I started my career actually in fashion. I thought I was going to go into finance and so forth, but really got drawn into fashion for something that was tangible and I could touch. Started with Macy's and Bloomingdale's, building brands in-house there, VF Corporation, Victoria's Secret, and really just fell in love with the idea of building brand and really what that human connection felt like. And most importantly, brand permission. So think Ralph Lauren. If you think Ralph Lauren, you think classic luxury, right? And if you think Victoria's Secret, you think provocative, sexy angel. And so brand building at the end of the day is storytelling, and then the products allow you to tell that story out in the world. And that's, what I really was drawn to. After that, I, realized social media was a thing. Come 2012, 2013, went and worked for a startup to understand, the world of content. And this is the era of Facebook and acquiring customers for $1.25, open pasture. And what drew me to that space was what a great way to build a brand. You can crowdsource information so quickly and understand what customers really want in these vast industries. So I was in a $13 billion bra industry in the United States alone with 40% market share at Victoria's Secret. Decided to launch my first company, Lively. Everything was crowdsourced backwards, wasn't supposed to work, very YOLO. And we shipped to every state in America. And so after that, I got the entrepreneurial bug, and now on to baby number 2.
Can you talk briefly about baby number 2?
Yeah. So, based on my history, you would think it was another fashion apparel play. I actually pivoted and went to CPG and decided that I saw an opening within wellness, where I started tinkering, and energy. And so I launched the first clean energy drink launched by Whole Foods. But really, the thing that's most interesting, I think, is everything is crowdsourced. And everything that we've learned about this drink and why it exists happened on TikTok. So go check your favorite natural retailer and check us out.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so we have some pretty cool experience in that discussion today. So I'm very much looking forward to ask you, as I say, all the questions that I have in mind. Before I do that, I have to do a little bit of advertising for YPO, obviously, who is helping us put all of that together. If you don't know what a YPO is a global leadership community. We have, I guess all three of us are part of that. More than 34,000 chief executives and executives in more than 150 countries, driven by the shared belief that the world needs better leader. And one of the benefits of being a YPO member is the opportunity to connect with leaders like Noah and Michelle and have conversations like this, where we can engage in idea exchange and lifelong learning around business topics, and we can create deeper relationships through virtual and global reach. I have met some of my closest friends personally through YPO because I've been a member for 10 years now. Before we get really started now, I'd like to remind all of you watching this live that you can ask or guess questions by posting them in the comment sections, I guess, below. And we will answer them as time permits. I love when I moderate this kind of conversation to constantly look at the chat, and to try to integrate the question. And both Michelle and Noah told me that they were ready to answer anything coming their way. So please ask tough questions. We all know that right now, path to exit is a complicated topic in this current environment, and so that's the moment. If you have question that you're dying to ask, this is the chat. All right, so let's set the stage for our audience by considering some of the statistics that we have right now around business exits. There was not long ago there was a survey that was published by the Exit Planning Institute (EPI), and what that survey shows is that exit planning is recognized as important, but 80% of business owners have no written exit plans, and 50% of them have done no exit planning at all. You would think that having an exit plan for business owner is pretty critical. And I would be curious, Noah, because you've gone through that process a few times, like, what do you think of that? And can you talk a little bit about how you reached the decision to exit and then the steps you took to plan this exit?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think it's funny because as people start businesses, a lot of people eventually think, hey, I want to sell this company. They don't see themselves doing it forever yet. You get so ingrained in the day to day and you're so busy running your business that you never have the time to actually put that plan in place and think about it. And I think that there's a number of things that are both, there's let's say lifestyle, like planning for lifestyle after exit. And then there's also a monetary side, or like, I guess the emotional side for planning personally after an exit. I think one, on understanding the industry you're in, right? What are the multiples of that industry? How do you sell those businesses? What does that look like? What are examples of that that's happened to other businesses? I always encourage talking to founders or CEOs of other companies that have gone through that process, especially if you have a certain company reaching out or going through that acquisition. Talk to other people that have gone through that same thing. It's funny for us on the staffing side, at least. I never really thought much about an exit. Staffing businesses are traditionally very challenging to sell, especially businesses on the service side. Some are a little easier than others, but generally very hard because you're not selling software. You're not selling something that majorly has recurring revenue a lot of the time. So multiples for the industry were like, let's say 6 to 7 times EBITDA. And we never thought about it. We were approached to sell the business from what would be called now probably a strategic acquirer, but at the time we just hadn't thought about it. And when you have somebody express interest in your business and you start to go through that process, you learn really fast how unprepared you are, really fast. And it's almost to the level of it's almost a little bit comical. If you're handling this process yourself, if you were to hire someone to help you through the process, they would have been much better guidance. For me, it was like, oh, I can do this, and you realize you're totally unprepared for it. Also, from when you think about like a tax perspective, how are you going to handle that when you go through the sale? Have you set up structure correctly? All of your contracts, have you signed contracts in the past 5 years ago that are going to create some that you gave someone a revenue share or some agreement that is going to come back to haunt you because that's still valid and you need to now get that person to void that contract. Things like QSBS, so like the qualified small business stock, being able to find ways to get tax-free money on a certain amount of earnings. For me, and sorry to divert for a second, but for me, going through that process, we saw that there was a much larger opportunity through this acquisition from the business that we'd built. There's kind of there's a ceiling, right, to the amount of money we're going to get out of an acquisition just because of what are standard industry multiples. But there was a much broader opportunity with a number of the businesses that were owned by the acquirer, and we rolled part of the deal into ownership in those.
What was before I asked the exact same question to Michelle with a little twist, what was for you, Noah, like the things that you were like, you felt like you were the most unprepared for, and that you would recommend to anyone who even remotely think about exiting at some point, like the thing that they really should have on their radar?
My partner and I owned our business outright. So a lot of the accounting and expenditures, you don't really think about, like you're using things personally, right, that are going through the business, whether that's like, I don't know, meals, travel, things like that, that become actually like quite a contentious point as you look at EBITDA in a business, because you do this thing where you're like, oh, we do like an add back, but acquirers will kind of fight you on those things. And just little, whether it can be generally small dollars, but it can equate to like a fairly large amount of money in the long term. Also contracts. We would sign contracts, and we'd do a 1-year contract, let's say, and that person had been there for 3 years and we never updated the contract. The clients were just still paying us, and we're like, great. But when you go to an acquirer and they're like, what do your contracts look like? And you're like, oh, well, they're actually all expired.
Wow.
And they're not multiple years. And people just poke holes in this stuff immediately. And it was something, looking back, that like so easy to have done ahead of time, but you're just not planning for it. But it can be the difference of a huge amount of leverage in those deals, because people start to put you in this, people that are very good at this, that do this quite a bit, kind of make you look like you're very unprepared and kind of back you into a corner. So you need to have as much offense as possible.
No, that makes complete sense. Michelle, same question. What are your thoughts, and more specifically, how did you arrive at the decision to exit Lively, and how did you plan for it? And then the bonus question is, I'd be curious if you have a view on why is it that there is like 80% of business owners that have no written exit plan, and 50% of them that seems to have done no exit planning at all, because that seems a little strange.
Sure. So, when I was building Lively, I had read a statistic right before I quit my job, which was, around 60% of startups implode within 2 to 3 years, 90% before they even hit 10. So in my mind, this was going to be a learning experience. The idea of just surviving 2 to 3 years was like really what I was thinking about. So I'm in the 80% of the people that didn't have an exit plan, to be honest, because, my goal was to build a brand and build a legacy for my children, and, really make a mark on the world, and showing, how to empower women, and that you can create brands that are women first. It wasn't about the exit necessarily. Now, with that said, I had come from the world of working for public companies. And so I had always treated Lively like a public company. I had board meetings before I had a board. Every dollar was accounted for in QuickBooks. I was so like financially and fiscally responsible. I would even plan like as if I was going to report to the street. And so that honestly, when I look back, put me in a really good position when someone did come, 3 years in and say, hey, we have someone that wants to buy your company. And similar, to Noah, it was a strategic, and I didn't even know what an LOI was. And so, interesting.
What is an LOI? Because now you're using.
Yeah, a letter of intent, right? To kind of, formally say that we're going to engage in this conversation. I thankfully had joined YPO right around when that conversation started. And I found a forum and I was able to start talk through how to do this. I didn't have a banker. So I was, really, of course, typical entrepreneur with a war chest is like, I'm going to do this without a banker. I'm going to go through this. And, similar to Noah, you need to make sure your financials, your contracts, your books, like everything is in order. They love you as a human. They love your personality. They love your style. But like, what's behind all of that? That's where they're looking, they're picking, they're digging, trying to find the holes. So yeah, I didn't have an exit plan.
And yet you managed through. So why do you think you and I mean, clearly many other founders do not have an exit plan? Lack of time, like what's the reason?
For me, this is going to be a very silly answer. I'm superstitious, right? I didn't have a launch party until the business was successful. Like, what are we celebrating? And to build for an exit for me fundamentally wasn't really what I wanted to build a business and a brand. And that's just different than trying to build a flip, right? There's people that go buy a house to renovate and flip it. And then there's people that build a house to like live, right? And create something that is like unique and beautiful. Guess what people want to buy? Which house, right? They want to buy the house that was like built with love and passion and dedication. And that's what is coveted in the market. When you're building for an exit, you sometimes become a little, in my opinion, too spreadsheet and statistical driven. You're just looking for what the acquirers want versus what the acquirers don't know they want.
That's really interesting you say that, because that's the conversation we're having, as I say, with a lot of our portfolio companies. There's almost like this superstition that, as you say, that you don't want to talk about exit because you're going to jinx it. But it's also like we have portfolio companies that told us, like, we went to pitch a VC and they told us up front, don't tell us about the exit because we're going to think that you want to exit the business and we want you to stay. And so that has made it a little more complicated to talk about exit strategy in the open in certain circumstances. On the other end of the spectrum, there's also a lot of founders who are very worried that exiting the business means that they're going to immediately lose all control over their baby, basically. And so there's a lot of thing, almost like emotional thought associated with should I or should I not exit business in the mind of founders. So Michelle, again, if you could continue on that vein, like could you shed a light on a myth or some bias that you have encountered during the process and how you managed it?
I mean, here's the great news, right? Someone wants to buy your company because you probably build something that is not like everything else that's out there. You can get acquired the same way. There is no playbook for an acquisition. Everyone says, well, this is what the stock purchase agreement should say, and this is how it's already always done, right? Same thing in fundraising. These are the rules for a Series A. They want unique outcomes, so you should feel confident to ask for unique terms and create the deal that's comfortable for both sides. And, going back to what Noah said, you should be smart and make sure you're set up for QSBS and like understand what all of those things are, all the tax shields, like set your company up and make sure everything that you've done from a tax perspective makes sense so there aren't holes to poke through and you're really ready for offense and thoughtful conversations. If you're in a good position to have that conversation, meaning like you've cleaned up your house and it's ready to present, right? You can start to now negotiate things that maybe are a little bit different, but make sense for you as a founder, but also make sense for the brand, the business, and the acquirer. So my advice is like, think outside the box and be really human about it. I remember having a 99-page stock purchase agreement the weekend of 4th of July. I'm not a lawyer, but I read it and I made my lawyer explain it to me. And I was like, hold on. Now, what does this mean? Right? Like, what happens? And don't feel shameful about that. Feel really powerful about the fact that like you want to be in the know. Don't rely on, in my opinion, like be in the know as to what you're signing up for as a founder what you're signing up for as a company being acquired, and what you're allowing the acquirer to, provide for you or, prevent you. And then you kind of go in and you're like, okay, eyes wide open.
Can you, so thanks. Noah, can you share a misconception that you've come across when it comes to business exits? And it's almost like, what's the mindset that entrepreneurs needs to have when they think about exits? And what are the different things that you've seen in your experience as you observe entrepreneur thinking about exit? That's 3 questions in one. Choose which one you want to answer.
Yeah, I do think, I think controlling like the back to like, this is your baby that you're selling, and control, right? And thinking that you're still running the business. And a lot of times acquirers, right, they want you to come run the business because you've been able to build that business. They want you for at least some period of time, but understanding that control. And I think that's something that a lot of people also don't think about, that becomes very challenging. Even in my case, right? Like you're still running, let's say you're still running that business, but changes are going to be made. And I realize like little things, right? Like we use Google and they use Teams. Like we need to move everyone to Teams, and I'm like, I hate Teams. Like this is like I was so upset about it. Like what do you mean? Why do you have to do that? Or like, hey, your PTO policy is a little bit too lenient. Like we need to cut back on this a little bit. And it's like, well, that's what we sold all the people that work for us on, this policy. So like we can't change it. And you realize that although you may be kind of in control, right, in a way, you really aren't at the end of the day, because you've sold your business, and you need to be able to kind of take a step back and just be okay with that, which is really very challenging, I think, for a lot of people that I know that have gone through that same process. Yeah, very, very challenging, and leads to a lot of founders leaving earlier, right, than their earnout periods that they have at those companies, because it's like, even the amount of money I can make, it's just not worth the stress that I have. And I have many friends that have sold companies for large amounts of money, and it's just like they're more stressed running that business inside the acquirer than they were running that business on their own, which is kind of crazy, because you're like, oh, your life's great. Look at how, like, you've made so much money here. You were so successful, but it's an emotion that's a little bit hard to understand.
That's interesting because both of you basically, with your own words, talk about the emotional and psychological aspect of going through an exit. I would love to continue down that path. Do you have any advice for business owners to mentally prepare for this change? Because again, there's the whole process in itself, and then there's what happens afterwards. So any tip? If I'm a founder and I'm thinking maybe one day I'm going to get an exit and I'm starting to get big waves of stress, or I'm in the process and like suddenly the stress level goes even higher, like any advice on how to prepare mentally for this?
I, Go ahead, Michelle.
I would say, I mean, the process of just being acquired is so rigorous, right? And so like you're in like one of the greatest sprints of your life. And I mean, for me, it was like I limped across the finish line. I remember the day we closed, and I woke up that morning and I was so sad. And I was not expecting to feel that way, but I was like deeply hurt and like heartbroken. And I had to like pull myself together. And you're going through all these amazing events throughout the day and parties and so forth. But like you feel, for me at least, I wasn't prepared for this, but I felt really lonely. And I didn't understand why. But you have to really be prepared to let go. And psychologically, this is something that you've probably built from within, right? And it means so much to you and the team and the culture and everything about it. And all of a sudden, it's like this baby you built is going to college and it's like a couple years old. Like, what? It's like, I don't know how to explain it. And I think that's what I wasn't prepared for. And it didn't take me days, it took me months to really process it all. And so I think really preparing for the after and like the time that you're going to need as a founder is really interesting.
That's interesting. I was having the same conversation, not with a founder, but with someone who had recently retired. And they were like, I have never thought about what I would actually really do besides going fishing after I retired. And now I'm sitting there and I'm like, there's only so many hours in the day I can go fishing. What do I do next? So
Right.
Makes
Except now you're still running the company, like you're running the company. So like you go back to work and it's the same company and the same team, but like there's something in the air.
no, for sure. No, what do you think? What experience do you have? What advice do you have for mentally preparing for that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is just for the process, right? I think you have to understand, and this may not be true in every case, but for the vast majority, it's like the acquirer is there to get the best deal they can, right? And there's a pretty proven playbook of how people acquire businesses, and it's they generally draw it out over time. They generally re-deal during the process, and they just kind of like to Michelle's point about limping across the finish line, like they know that this works, which is why they do it. And they're going to say, oh, well, like they just wear you down to the point they're like, well, now given this new information we have, even though we've been negotiating this for 9 months and already set a price, well, given this, I think we're going to have to give you a little bit less money. Right. And you just get to a point where like, I just want this over with so badly. Like, okay, fine. Like, but that's the whole thing. Like, you start to make concessions, which is exactly what the whole process is drawn out to do. So I think just understanding the process you're getting into, getting good advisors around you, whether that's someone actually helping handle the transaction or just good advisors that can help you through that process. But I think, yeah, too, about like what's next, right? And having a pretty good idea of what's next, because that is really lonely, right? And I think you do when you lose that sense of ownership, that's a huge mental toll. When for most entrepreneurs, I think it's your identity, right? Your whole identity is tied up in that business that you're running, and suddenly it's like you don't have that same feeling. So just understanding like what is next. Maybe you are comfortable just taking some time off and taking it easy, but I think a lot of the people that I see that go through that, they have like a month. They're like, I'm just going to take like a year off, and it's like, I don't know, 2 weeks. They go do a nice vacation. They're like, all right, I'm ready for the next thing. What can I be doing?
All right, so I want to go into that direction, like how you specifically decided what was going to be next. But before we go, I wanted to go back to something that you said around surrounding yourself with the right people, finding the right advisors. Any advice, like when you're like, okay, now there is an opportunity for an exit, like what should be how does the team around you, and I don't necessarily mean the employees in your company, but like the broader team, like what's your team that is going to help you go through that process? What should founders think about? And so maybe Noah, you can start, and then Michelle, if you have any additional view on that.
Yeah, for the people, I guess the big thing for me would be finding people that, one, if you're looking for kind of advisory, right, and someone to lead you through that, definitely somebody that has experience in that industry that has done similar transactions. Because there's a lot of, well, it is broadly like you're selling the business and there's a certain amount of legal structure and whatnot. Any negotiating leverage of somebody that understands those transactions, exactly how those companies get acquired, the things that become very important, can be the difference of huge amounts of dollars, like on the exit and just negotiating in the first place. So I think between your business advisor and then from a legal perspective, having somebody that has dealt with those M&A transactions, understands that space, and then tax, right? And I think tax is a big thing. Having somebody that really understands that ahead of time, right? And it can help you start to plan for how are you going to structure this? What is next? Like, let's say you sell a business, great, and you've made a lot of money, but do you have cash flow now? Are you making money? You're probably spending a lot more money, but maybe you're not making income. So starting to think about all those things is really important, I think, pretty far ahead of time.
That makes sense. Michelle?
I mean, similar to Noah, I would say obviously making sure you have a lawyer that you trust and like definitely understands the industry, but also that you can have conversations where what's good for the company, but also what's good for your employees and for the founder. And so like not some where you're kind of again like able to be super vulnerable and honest and open about what you're curious on or just don't understand. Tax for sure. And then other founders, right? So like talk to other founders that have been through a similar exit, adjacent industries, et cetera, and like try to, really use those experience shares to see like what your blind spots are in your situation. And it's really nice to be able to talk to someone and be like, I don't really understand this and I really would like to. Also, how do I like really think about how to get to this post acquisition personally, culturally, and team wise? And those are all like really hard things to navigate.
And to
Yep.
your to touch on that. I think a lot of people just underestimate they just underestimate the process in general and are vastly underprepared for where they need to go, and they also just don't ask questions. I think that's the to your point, asking questions. And there's like a you go into these rooms and you feel like you're just not under there's a bunch of legal jargon, right, in these documents that you don't really understand, and so you kind of defer to your attorney potentially to say, does this look good? And they're like, yeah, I mean, standard language. And you're like, okay. But being able to actually just be vulnerable and be like, I don't actually understand that. What exactly does that mean? What are the implications? Because I think a that can be a huge thing where you just find little points that might be overlooked, but can be a very meaningful difference. And whether that's the financial outcome or your operating capacity in the future, your earnout, things like that.
What about your family and your friends? Because when I support a founder going through an exit, at one point or another, there's usually a moment where the conversation turns to, I think my spouse is going to quit. It's going to leave me if I continue down that path. My friends, I haven't seen my friend in like 6 months, and every time I see them, I'm so stressed. Like, how did you think, or how do you think a founder should be integrating the family and friend component, if at all, into that path to exit?
I mean, for me, I think I learned as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs understand what you're going through mentally, right? And your spouses and your friends are there to support you, but you can't project on them what's going on in your brain and in your mind and in your body because they're not going to see it or understand it the same way, right? And so for me, I was just very much like, I'm going through this process. It's probably going to be 6 to 9 months. And during that process, I may be quieter and stressed and etc. I just prepared them for it. And it was so nice to have their genuine support and expect nothing other than for me to just be like heads down and focused on the situation. Um, I knew if I tried to talk it through with them and so forth, and maybe that was wrong of me, but I just felt like, look, I'm gonna like really buckle down, talk to people that have been through the experience, and focus on getting it done.
Noah, what about you?
I think that there's just setting expectations. I think that people tend to want to give advice when you talk about problems, right? And a lot of the times with your family and friends, they may not understand it, right, to the capacity that you would need them to offer advice that would be relevant, and or they haven't been in that situation. So being really clear of like, I want to be able to vent about this, but I just need you to listen. I don't want you to come to me with solutions for this. I think that's where these groups, right, the YPOs of the world, become just extremely important, is having people around you that will be able to understand that very quickly. Like, you don't need too much context to get them up to speed, and a lot of times can give you relevant advice. And if not, usually they have somebody that can, right? And I think that's the power of the network at the end of the day.
I totally agree. YPO is a fantastic environment to have this conversation, and leave your spouse alone when it comes to conversation about an exit. So we talked about the mindset before going into an exit process. We talked a little bit about the process and the team you should have around, and the pitfalls, the thing that you should be looking at. And then Noah, you mentioned this question of like, how do you define what's next, and how do you make this plan to make sure that like you have something to look up or to look for after you exit. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? How did you um, find out what you actually wanted to do next, and what kind of steps founders can take to make the most of the life that they have after they exit a company?
Yeah, and so we, my partner and I, like we still have ownership in all of in the kind of like hold co of the acquirer. So that was a very easy, like, hey, we're going to be spending time on this for a period of time. But I think understanding, like as a founder, understanding what do you really enjoy doing, right? And like what do you like about like running a business is tough, but like what are the things that you really enjoy? I see a lot of people that will get out of a business as well and they start being like, oh, I'm going to start investing. And that's good and well if you are an investor by trade, but a lot of them aren't, right? So they go and they just start investing in things that, like, there's a bunch of shiny objects that start to appear, right? And people start to appear with great deals and you don't really know any better. So people just start to get into these things that are like, that's just naturally what you do after you exit, right? You go invest in businesses and maybe you buy real estate, but you don't really understand real estate. And so you're going to have so much coming at you. I think it's just understanding what do you really want to do? Because if you know, hey, I'm like, I thrive on running a business. Like personally, I feel that way. Like no matter what, I'm just going to keep starting other businesses. I really enjoy it, right? I enjoy the stress that comes from it. I kind of thrive off of it. So I think being able to really just understand where you get energy is going to help a lot in that process. But I don't think there's an easy answer for the what's next. Just not sitting idle.
That makes sense. What about you, Michelle? Because yeah, I mean, you sold a company and like you literally was like, yeah, let's do another one. So how did you arrive at your what next, and how did the process go in your head about making the most of life after that first exit?
Yeah, I mean, I think after the exit, I was lucky enough that I got to stay on as CEO for a number of years, and decide when it was my time to leave, right? And so I used that time to really think about what I wanted to do next. And I was floundering by the end. I was like, I could advise or boards. And then I did exactly what Noah said, started investing. And I was like, oh, we'll do a fund. And I had like 4 careers in a month, brewing. And then I was just like, I stepped back and I'm like, where am I finding joy? Where am I truly finding joy? And I was at an event last summer with a bunch of founders, female founders, and I remember being around a bonfire with early stage founders. And I was listening to their like problems and their questions that they were asking me, and I found myself envious of them in the stage they were in. And I came home and I was like, that's it. I like the building. I like the early days of taking an idea on an iPhone and seeing it come to life in reality in a world. And then I was like, well, and where do I like it? I like it in industries that are vast and have the ability to be multi-billion-dollar companies, but also have an inflection point of needing change. And so then I started just like tinkering with that idea, and I had boards and boards of ideas and concepts, and I was having the most fun. My husband was like, what are you doing? I had these whiteboards. I'm running to the pantry, like stapling, building, printing, pumping music. I was so happy. I had 75 URLs on a given day going, and I'm like, this is where I find joy. I'm a brand builder. And it's amazing to have that gift of time and freedom to figure it out. And just at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, I like to build companies. I like to build brands. And now I'm like really clear as to when the inflection point is.
What did you leverage from your past experience to build your next business, and how much did the exit process of your first business help to build the second one?
Yeah. So, the first time I was a first time entrepreneur. So I was like begging other entrepreneurs to have juice and coffee with me, and I would write lists of all the things that I was most terrified, like don't know fulfillment, don't know digital marketing, da da da, and would like go out and attack and try to find people that were really savvy in those areas. The second time around, you have that network, right? So you can really go out and reach. You also have, I would say, like marketplace confidence, right? Second time founders, there's like statistics obviously around that post exit. And so there is like a brewing confidence, which I believe in manifestation and energy. So like the inertia has already started, right? And I would say also you have like a mental muscle. Entrepreneurship for me is just like an athlete, right? You don't just get out there and run a marathon. You run 1, 5, 10, have to ice yourself and injure yourself on your path to 26 miles, right? But your muscle is so strong now, like you are ready. And like the vulnerability and the fear factor is just different. you can kind of just like you can move faster and take the jabs, quicker.
What about you, Noah? Anything that you took from your previous business says, I guess I have to use plural, to shape the vision of your next business?
I think I think for me it's just wanting to solve hard problems, and I've liked to, like, for instance, started a business in the agriculture tech space that we still have and run today, called Common Ground. We're a farmland transaction marketplace. Didn't know much about ag going into it, but you're able to see problems. Like, I've really enjoyed the seeing a problem from the outside, and saying, like, not really being informed of an industry, but seeing a problem from the outside and saying, like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know why they do it that way. And then just tackling that with, like, the naivete to be able to do it, because otherwise you wouldn't, right? Because you get in and then you're like, oh, I see why it's not done that way. Once you get in, but, like, to start a company, you kind of need to probably not fully understand an industry, at least for me, a lot of the time, because otherwise I would be like, oh, that problem's already solved, or it's too hard of a problem. So I've really enjoyed that. But I think you also, like, that second time around, you just get more used to kind of getting beat up, right? You kind of what you're in for a lot more. You know the stress that's going to happen. You know that probably that first idea that you set out to do is probably not really going to work the way you thought it would, and you're probably going to shift.
And yet you still do it one more time. So it's like, it's going to hurt, but I love it. Is that
But
what
you
you're
love
saying?
it, but you realize, like, the things. It's been funny recently. I was just talking about this to a friend, but, like, the things that phase you that used to be like a fire. I would get you get a message, you're like, oh my god, like, this is, like, everything's over. This is gonna be like, this is just a mess. And now it's like, you get that message, I'm like, oh, okay, like, it's fine. Like, you get that. I think you get that confidence after a period of time that, like, everything is gonna be okay, right? Like, at the end of the day, you're gonna be okay. Everything is gonna be okay. Rarely are things as dire as they seem, and I think for startups, that's you're dealing with fires every day. So once you can get that kind of reflex to and build up that tolerance, it puts you in a much healthier mental state.
So we really talked about the whole path from, like, let's get started about thinking about an exit to, hey, why, now that I've done one exit, why not get another business and potentially have another exit? I'm curious, how much the current economic environment, which is objectively tougher for startup than it has ever been in the last 15 years, I think, in terms of fundraising, in terms of IPO, in terms of anything related to financing and liquidity. I'm wondering whether any of the things that you've mentioned changes now that the environment is different. Like, do you look at this from a different angle? Would you do it differently?
Yes. I would say fundamentally, the way in which I'm building is the same. So, what I do is I create brands backwards. I do it via community and social proof and focus grouped first, and then launch based on what the consumers are telling me. But I'm also clear on, it has to be a sector that has the ability to grow quickly and that has shown fatigue in who the legacy and top brands are. More importantly, though, how you build the company is different, right? Like, for me, I grew up in the D2C era. Facebook was pretty awesome in 2015 and 16 when I was launching. Instagram didn't even have stories. And that was the way that we were able to build that company. It is not the way that this company is going to be built in 2023 into 2024. It's just a different marketplace. However, brands were built before social media. They were built through billboards and television and grassroots and word of mouth and so forth. And so, like, you just have to think about your tactics differently to get to a place where, again, you are covetable. And covetable could be different now. Covetable used to be about growing quickly on the top, etc. Covetable now is being able to show that you can grow quickly while also being, savvy on the bottom. And so really understanding the field that you're about to, walk onto.
Makes sense. Noah, any words of wisdom about how to survive and exit in this current environment?
The exit, I'm still figuring out. I think one of the big learnings for me, right, was, hey, for this ag tech business, right, we started it, looking back retrospectively, I probably wouldn't have taken venture capital. But what happens is you sell a business, and it's very easy to raise capital, right, for the next thing. And I think the second that you do raise capital, it kind of propels you down a path, right? And you're like, now I'm down that path. Whether you would have started it and said, oh, actually, there's a pivot, like the original model, if you're using your own money, you're like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Like, you figure that out really fast, right? Because you're like, oh, this isn't working. Maybe you're a little bit impatient, but like, we need to move it this direction. You raise venture money, and then you're stuck in this, well, now we're going down that path because people gave me money to do this, right? And so I think it takes a little bit longer to understand like what works versus what doesn't work. And so I think for just a lot of second time founders, it becomes still in this environment, you're able to raise money because you can use that past success. But a lot of times it's not always the right move. And also from a valuation perspective, people will value businesses very early, right, in a much higher dollar value, and you have to live up to that now. And it doesn't mean it's like, for instance, for me, right, like I didn't go into the same industry, right? It's a totally new industry I'm in, but people just bet on you, and so you place a higher valuation on the business, and then it's like, well, we gotta work to make sure that we can hit that now and are able to raise ancillary capital.
So I think I know the answer, but I'm still going to ask the question. Do you think it's still worth it to be an entrepreneur these days? Because it's objectively harder to raise. It is objectively harder to exit. Like, do you think it's still worth it?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, look at us. We do it for the high. We do it for the fulfillment factor, my tennis game is weak because I like to build businesses. I don't, I find so much joy in. Yesterday I was at a storage unit, and today I was loading coolers at a local lunch place, and someone was like, Michelle, what are you doing? I was like, having the time of my life.
Noah, what about you?
Yeah, for me as well, like I just don't know what else there is, right? I think like I think a lot of happiness, at least for me, is around problem solving and being able to solve problems and start, building businesses. That's what you do all day. So whether it still is like burning you out and you're exhausted and all these things, it's fulfilling in a way that, I don't know, keeps me coming back to want to do more.
So we are almost at the end. For the people who are watching live, this is your last opportunity to ask questions. So please put them in the chat. And while we are waiting for that, I had one last question for both of you, which is around YPO. So you're both member of YPO. I am a member of YPO, as I mentioned before. And you alluded to YPO being part of your life or your business life, and helping you go through some of the challenges that you encountered as a founder. Can you, while respecting the confidentiality of your forum and YPO in general, can you talk a little bit about the benefits that you or your family have enjoyed by belonging to this community, and what do you think founders, entrepreneurs, and business leaders can gain by belonging to this type of organization, YPO or others? So, Michelle, I'd be curious if you had any view on that.
Yeah, I mean, the timing in which I, was lucky enough to learn about the chapter that I joined was right around, when I was approached for our acquisition. So it was fundamentally like very helpful for me, from like understanding the process of acquisition, but more so just being able to call people that were trusted and had a different way of caring about me. They weren't my friends or family out the gate, but they fundamentally cared about me because I was part of this community. And so like you're just like welcomed into a safe place, which sounds really odd. And I remember when I first joined YPO, I'm like, I can't believe how honest I get to be here. Like I found myself saying things I didn't even know I would normally have said. And I was like, wow, like if you can really unlock the power of YPO, you learn so much about yourself that you never really would have taken the time or had the opportunity to learn. For my family, I think it makes me less of like this like stress bubble, because now I have a place that I can, go to really like massage out the kinks and understand what my underlying, frustration is. And so that's just like really helped me in my marriage, and just even as my kids are growing into becoming, complicated humans, you have a place that you can be like really honest and open and figure things out.
What about you, Noah? Well, can you talk a little bit about your experience as well with YPO?
Yeah, I think the personal side is really important, and again, like having a group of people that have unbiased feedback for you. I think in your life, there's very few people that give you not honest feedback, but just feedback in the sense that they have no agenda behind giving you that or telling you that. And so, having people that are just there to take in what you're telling them and be able to tell you what they think or what their experiences have been in those situations, I think is hugely valuable, especially around being able to do anything related to a business. You see that while you might have a bunch of different industries that people are in that you're surrounded by, a lot of those businesses are fairly the same. They deal with most of the same problems, and I think you're able to just navigate things that otherwise you would have just ran into that wall. But somebody mentions an offhand thing about something that you're like, oh, I need to do that in my business, and you're just able to get so much value. And the network, right? I think I really utilize the network. I don't know, a couple days or last week, I was looking at a business in a space, and I was like, who in YPO, right, is in the space, and found someone that runs one of the top companies in that entire space. Wrote him, got a response in probably 20 minutes, and was on the phone like the next day and like getting feedback.
Wow.
So I think just that access to a network of people that have that are part of or built really incredible businesses is invaluable.
All right. I think that's the perfect conclusion. I don't have much more to add. I agree with everything the two of you said regarding YPO. So thank you so much to both of you. Michelle, Noah, really thank you for finding the time to talk to everybody about this. Thank you to all of you who tuned in today to be part of this conversation. If you, again, I have to do a little bit of advertising. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know by sharing it with your friends, with your followers, with your connection. Don't forget to follow YPO on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, everybody, every social network that you can think of, or to follow Noah and Michelle as well, because I'm sure they have a lot of news coming up at some point in the future. That's it. I'm Maëlle Gavet. This was YPO Present Ask the Expert, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.